I am Karen Thomas, and we offer natural resources for parents of children with autism to help them be able to find solutions to get their children better. And I often interview, as you know, if you've followed for a while, a lot of experts in various fields. And today we have another yet special guest with us. We have Dr. Jodie Dashore, and I'm going to give you a brief description of her background because it is very interesting. Dr. Dashore is an internationally recognized pioneering physician in the world of what Dr. Dashore refers to as complex autism. And we're going to get into this in the interview. And biotoxin illnesses from chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which comes from water-damaged buildings. Dr. Dashore is highly specialized in the German biological and holistic treatment of children with autism, comorbid with tick diseases, mold, and biotoxin illnesses, and uses cutting-edge technology with all-natural methodology. And Dr. Dashore designs highly individualized genetic-based biological protocols to help children with ASD to achieve their full potential. And her background is that Dr. Dashore is a natural healer, author, teacher, mentor, researcher, scientist, physician, and there's a lot more to this. She went to the University of Bombay Medical School and got her alternative medical degree from Calcutta Medical School. And also, she is the founder and director of Integrative Neurosensory Associates, a functional biomedical and integrative medicine practice in Marlborough, New Jersey. So she's now in the United States and works with children and adults from across the country with all of these varied comorbid symptoms that I just mentioned. So first of all, I'd like to say welcome, Dr. Dashore, and thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me on today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. I know that a lot of these comorbid symptoms are actually quite common in children with autism, but a lot of parents aren't aware of them. Things like the mold biotoxin illness from water-damaged building exposure and Lyme's disease. There are a lot of things, pandas, which I'll let you explain, but these are all things that sometimes parents might think, well, how come my child isn't getting better? I've been doing, certain things that I've heard were helpful. And of course, there's also always, a little more to do. There are other things, but these are these kind of standalones that come up that a lot of people aren't aware of. So would you mind just giving us a little background with how you work with children on the autism spectrum and these comorbid symptoms, such as the ones that we just discussed?
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right when you say, there are certain families that have tried everything for their children, everything that is known to work for children with autism on the autism spectrum. And what I find is the patients that come to me are either that the current available treatments are not working, or that, they work for a little while and then they plateau. For example, there are children that go for sensory integration, and within the session, it seems that the child is really responding well. He's a very smart kid. He's able to pick up pretty quickly, but there is no generalization. Once the child gets back home, lasts for a few days, and once again the behaviors emerge. So it got me thinking, because Karen, I don't know if you're aware, but my own son went from being on the spectrum to being on the honor roll now. He's in a pre-med high school. We thought he was on the spectrum in the beginning. It took many years of going through gestational Lyme disease. I passed Lyme disease on to him in utero, which we found out much later. So he went through gestational Lyme. He went through being on the spectrum right after his MMR vaccination. No, not MMR. It was DTaP. Right after DTaP, he stopped making any further progress, and he was on the spectrum. So pretty much, he's gone through pandas. He's gone through being on the spectrum, and we found out he had 11 co-infections in the brain.
Wow. And
So
how did you find out that he had 11 co-infections in the brain?
we went through labs, we went to several different practitioners, and after all that was addressed, we found that there was, why are we still at 80%? What's going on? Of course, by the time he had made phenomenal progress, so we found out there is something called as chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is, exposure to mold if you are genetically inclined to mold. And I'm going to get into all of this, but just wanted to give you an overall overview. So now I have this, which is what got me thinking, and I came up with the term, this is not just autism. I mean, as if autism wasn't complex enough, this is actually complex autism.
Absolutely.
So that's something that I thought, I should put it out there. So what I see in my practice is, let's talk about children with underlying co-infections, since that was a question you raised. Now, spirochetes have been shown to enter and actively infect the human central nervous system.
And just for the parents listening who don't know what spirochetes are, could you briefly describe them?
Yes, of course. Spirochetes are the bacteria that are found in ticks, and these bacteria are known to cause Lyme disease. And also to keep in mind that every tick is a cesspool of disease. Many infections are carried within the tick, and usually what I see is after a tick bite, tick attachment, tick engorgement, quite a few infections are passed on into the child or the person. But, I'm just going to say child because we are speaking about children today.
Right.
So that's so what happens is when the bacteria enter the brain, it increases inflammation in the brain. And what else they do is they secrete toxins, which help the ticks to break down connective tissue in the brain, and it also helps in lowering the effectiveness, or it increases the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. So once the blood-brain barrier is compromised, we can have issues with autoimmunity, we can have issues with other bacteria entering the brain. Now, the number one herbalist for Lyme disease, pretty much on the planet, is one of my good friends and mentors, Stephen Buhner. And he talks about bacterial intelligence, saying that Lyme bacteria and a couple others like strep and staph are, they've been around for millions of years, much longer than we have as humans. And the bacterial intelligence is such that they want to make sure that us humans as a host stay compromised, that the immune system stays compromised, and that they stay hidden so they can survive. So what they do is, if the spirochete bacteria are the first that enter the body, then they gather information about the immune system, and they actually pass it on to other bacteria that happen to come later. So that was interesting to me. So here's what I learned from another world-renowned physician. Because of my background, I'm very grateful, and I've been very fortunate at being able to learn and mentor with some of these world-renowned physicians. And what I learned from Dr. Charles Ray Jones was some of the neuropsychiatric manifestations of Lyme-induced autism. How's this for an idea, right? I get parents that ask me, so is the autism from Lyme? So I'm like, yes, doesn't that just blow your mind that autism could be a symptom of Lyme disease, right? Because Lyme is known as the great imitator. Because
the autism is just a label name for a bundled group of symptoms that vary greatly from one person to another.
Correct, absolutely. So here, some of the symptoms that could, some of these neuropsych manifestations of Lyme induced autism or Lyme in the brain, or neuroborreliosis as is known, it could be brain fog, hypersensitivity to light, sound, taste, smell, low muscle tone, difficulty with motor planning, mood disorders, acting out, aggression, self-harm. I mean, doesn't this sound familiar? Poor coordination, right? No eye contact, having visual difficulties, processing difficulties. But you know, one interesting thing, I still remember little Johnny. Most parents, when they come in and they have a child with underlying Lyme disease, right? The most common things that I hear is that, you know what, Dr. Dashore, I know and I can see that my child is very curious, very, you know, wants to learn. He wants to socialize. You know, he's not in his own world like someone, you know, with severe autism or on the other end of the spectrum. But the thing is, he's not able to. You know, I see that he wants to speak, and there are many signs that you have a child that is highly intelligent and, you know, somehow has plateaued or treatment is not working. And one thing that I found in little Johnny was, you know, there was a lot of this hand flapping, the hand shaking, right? And there was a lot of head shaking. So that got me thinking, and long story short, you have to understand that Lyme disease loves to attack the nerves. So when you have any patient, even the ones that don't have autism, you know, they're adults, when you have Lyme-induced neuropathy, what do you get? You know, you get tingling in your hands and feet, you get numbness, right? You get muscle fasciculations or muscle twitching, you get pain, and even the adults, they end up flapping their hands. So when you have children with autism, with language difficulties and not being able to communicate, and you know, what are they going to do when they start feeling pain, when they start feeling GI discomfort, when they start getting migraines, headaches, you know, they act out. And we found about 7 co-infections in Johnny. He was not exposed to mold, but he did have 7 co-infections. One of the co-infections was Ehrlichia, which actually suppresses your immune system. You see low white blood cell counts. You see bone marrow being suppressed. You see anemia. So here was a child who was weak, malnourished, had Lyme-induced neuropathy, a lot of hand flapping, and had Lyme in the brain. So there was Lyme-induced PANS. He didn't have strep issues, so there was no pandas, but there was PANS. And again, you know, we'll get into the differences once we finish talking about Lyme. Mm-hmm. So that is, then on the other hand, we had Johnny who wanted to socialize. You know, he would notice everything. He would be like, Dr. Jodie, you have new lipstick today. You're looking so pretty. So that was, he was aware. He was here in the now. And then he would snap out of it and seem to go back into his own world. But you know, we saw glimpses of a very bright child.
Mm-hmm. You know that they're in there, right? And then parents usually know. Like, yes. Like my son was diagnosed with autism and is now recovered, and I knew that he could get better. I just knew it. I didn't know how at the time, but I knew that I was going to be able to find solutions.
Find solutions, exactly. Yes, I'm right there with you. That's the exact same feeling I had about my son. So we found, now his mother wanted to, I'm talking about Johnny, his mom wanted to do all natural treatment, right? She didn't want to pursue antibiotics of any sort, so which is what we did. You know, we did a lot of homotoxicology, which is complex homeopathy, because what I found is single remedies just don't work, or they take very long to work, you know, constitutional, because Lyme disease is a systemic issue. You know, there is a multi-system involvement. There is, you can have gut problems, you can have brain problems, you can have endocrine issues. Lyme can go after your heart. Mm-hmm. So those, you know, and speaking of heart, when I see a child on the spectrum that has very unusually high anxiety, not just anxiety of new situations, you know, that can be seen in even neurotypical children. You know, you're going into a new doctor's office, but this is atypical anxiety, very high anxiety. that brings about aggression and other behaviors. That too gives me a clue that there is some sort of brain inflammation that is underlying this. What's going on with this child? I mean, pretty much, the brain is seriously inflamed, along with immune compromise. So that is, I can't tell you how many parents come to me and say, let's talk about Johnny, right? So mom was like, he's really very healthy. So I'm like, what do you mean? So she says, he never really gets a fever, but he has autism and he has, these behaviors and all of these treatments don't seem to stick. So one thing to keep in mind is not getting fevers is not healthy. It shows that your immune system is compromised. I mean, every child, a couple good high fevers, a couple times a year, that is kind of normal, isn't it, Karen? I mean, right?
It's the body's defense mechanism. It's
Exactly.
trying to fight something. So if you're not getting a fever, or people who try to get rid of the fever as soon as it shows up, they don't let the fever really do its job.
Right.
Because they're so afraid of fevers. I mean, it's different if it's up to 105 or something ridiculous. But, that fevers are there to tell you that your body is working right. So you're saying then is if these children are not getting fevers at all, their immune systems are not reacting, they're not working.
Exactly, yes. There is, there is what is called as Lyme-induced immune deficiency. Pretty much you become a sitting duck for co-infections, because the predominant mission of the Lyme bacteria and the co-infections that come with it. So I have some children that have Bartonella. Almost all of them have infections called as Bartonella Hensley. Bartonella quintana is another one. Many, or if not most, have Babesia, which is a cousin of malaria. They have a couple different species of Babesia. And now European and American research is discovering that Lyme itself has a few different strains. So, it's like Borrelia miyamotoi, Borrelia recurrentis, and Borrelia burgdorferi is not the only strain that is being seen here in the US. So you have this Lyme-induced immune deficiency because these co-infections have to keep your immune system in check so they can exist and grow. And then there's toxins that are released by these bacteria that affect multiple systems in the body, including the brain. And then there is uncontrolled inflammation. Obviously, because there is bacteria in the body, there's toxins in the body, your immune system gets overactive, and you have pro-inflammatory cytokines being released, including in the brain. So this is what you see. So what I see is I see three different kinds of immune reactions in the body of children. One is anergy, which is what we just spoke about. Anergy means not having any response to, not getting a normal fever response when being exposed to common infections, the common cold, couple strep infections here and there, right? A couple sinus infections, 1 or 2 ear infections. So those are common, and I don't see them in the population that I see. Then the second would be allergy. There is a lot of food sensitivities, there is a lot of environmental sensitivities, and there's a lot of multiple chemical sensitivities which are seen in the patient population that I see. And the last but not the least, I see autoimmunity. Now, so in adults, that can manifest as multiple sclerosis, as Parkinson's, and that blows the adults' minds too. I mean, are you telling me that my MS can be a symptom, that my Parkinson's can be a symptom? I'm like, absolutely. If you have any autoimmune issue, including Crohn's, colitis, and anything autoimmune, it is absolutely essential to rule out underlying tick-borne infections, because they can be so immune suppressing, so immune dysregulating. So that's So that's what I see in the patients that have tick-borne infections.
And it can mimic so many other things that you're talking about. And one thing that I've found, people have a hard time getting a positive result for a Lyme test. And I've heard sometimes, I've looked at if the immune system is really working hard because it's so weak, basically, the gut is out of balance, they're loaded with heavy metals and other toxins, then often the tests for Lyme won't come up positive yet. You kind of have to heal the system a bit before you test to get accurate tests. So could you talk a little bit about that and what you find is are good sources for Lyme testing as well? Because I know those are a little challenging. It's kind of the tests used in the United States anyway, a lot of them, the general blood swab tests aren't correct or don't work well.
Right, absolutely. Yes, you're absolutely right. So when you have bacteria whose sole purpose in life is to suppress your immune system, all of the numbers that you see in lab testing, right, the antibody titers, who produces those antibodies? That is your immune system. If you have an immune system that is weakened, you will not see the antibody response. Not just to the Lyme and co-infections, you will also see a reduced or suppressed antibody response to other co-infections. I've had a child that was treated for mystery asthma for 2.5 years with steroids.
Mystery.
Right? Mystery asthma, because he was coughing pretty much 24/7, was unable to do any kind of sports because of exertion, right? So that's it, pharmaceuticals, start with steroids, start with albuterol. Long story short would be that 2.5 years doing steroids and other meds, he stopped growing. Mm-hmm. And when I saw him, it was pretty obvious that there was underlying co-infection. So it wasn't mystery asthma. For 2.5 years, this poor child had walking pneumonia. And not even once did the immunologist ever think of looking for Mycoplasma pneumonia bacteria.
Wow.
They would rather suppress, and they had this. So when I saw him, this child, the Mycoplasma being a cell wall deficient, meaning they don't have cell wall, and cell wall in a bacteria is what's used to manufacture food. So you had this child was failure to thrive, teeny tiny, skinny, because all of his nutrition was being used up by the organisms inside. Mm-hmm. So that was really sad. But the good news was within 3 months of treatment, his mystery asthma vanished, and he hasn't had to use any kind of nebulizer or any kind of treatment for asthma. I mean, it's been 4 years now. We still stay in touch, but he's doing great. Just one example. So I'm sorry, I digress. So coming back to the immune suppression and lab testing, right? There is a 2-tier lab testing that is done through the general labs. You have the ELISA and you have the Western blot, right? So ELISA is not sensitive enough, and ELISA is not specific enough, and the Western blot is not sensitive enough to be able to diagnose Lyme disease, right? When you have a test that is highly specific, that helps you rule in the diagnosis. And when you have a test that is highly sensitive, that helps you rule out the diagnosis. So, it all started as a pretty hopeful system. Let's have a test, the ELISA, which can help us rule in. And then in case that doesn't happen, then we have the Western blot that can help us rule out. Either ways we know, if you have Lyme or not. But unfortunately, because of this immune suppression, mm-hmm. The specificity and the sensitivity of these 2-tier testing is less than a coin toss, is less than 50%. It's very unfortunate. Then we have specialty labs. So I don't know if I'm allowed to mention names, but
yes, absolutely. I like to give resources to parents, and then I'll link to them at the bottom of the page at naturallyhealingautism.com for them. Okay, great. So we have specialty labs now. We actually have a few specialty labs. The ones that I use in my practice is either IGeneX labs,
or I would use DNA Connections Lab. DNA Connections Lab looks at the DNA PCR analysis in urine. So for those children that are that have like severe behavioral issues or anxiety issues with blood draw, I find that DNA Connections Lab works better. With it's just a urine collection versus having to sit there for blood draw.
Right.
So those are the two options. Now, I recently came, I was recently introduced to a wonderful new lab test that is, that should be on the market soon. It's called as Global Lyme Diagnostics. Now, Global Lyme Diagnostics, one of the predominant questions that I get asked is, just because there was a tick crawling on me, does that mean that I have Lyme disease? You know, how do I know if the tick, you know, took a bite and then, you know, was still crawling around, or a couple of places if I got a bite, because sometimes that's not noticeable.
And some of the ticks are the size of a poppy seed or smaller. You cannot even notice them.
That's right. Yes, you know, some of the ticks, the baby ticks or the nymph ticks, they're just like a speck of dust. Mm-hmm. That's quite true. Yes. So the ELISA, or many of the tests on the market right now, they look at a specific tick protein which is called as OSP-A. So the tick will demonstrate OSP-A, which gets picked up in the test, which means that it's carrying Lyme disease, or, you know, that's what it means. But there is another protein that's called as OSP-C. Now, OSP-C is displayed on the tick after the tick has had a blood meal. So after the tick has bitten you, then you see OSP-C. So this is absolutely fantastic that the Global Lyme Diagnostics test looks at OSP-C. So that gives you an answer. You know, there's no mystery that, oh, you know, did I get the bite? Did I get the Lyme? Do I have Lyme in me? Do I have to spend, you know, thousands with a private lab? So that's, and I'm going to look into this lab a little bit further, because I was very impressed with the presentation and the science behind it. The same lab has actually come up with the recently released vaccination for animals for Lyme disease, you know, and vaccination has been very successful. So I know that their research is pretty solid. So I'm going to look a little bit further into this lab, because, you know, what will happen? It's going to eliminate the two-tier testing. You don't have to go for ELISA, and then many pediatricians don't like to prescribe both ELISA and Western blot, even though both should be done together because of the immune suppressing nature of the spirochete, you know, the Lyme bacteria. But most pediatricians just run the ELISA, which becomes useless in most. So yeah, go ahead.
A lot of people aren't aware of what the ELISA is, and it can be kind of hard to find. So if you have a good resource for it, and if you could give our listeners a little bit more background on what the ELISA is.
The ELISA, honestly, it would be, okay. So when you test through Quest and LabCorp, right, the first tier of testing is the ELISA test. And ELISA looks for antibodies to the Lyme bacteria. It's best to just keep it as simple as that. And then the Western blot, which is, so, okay, wait, let me backtrack a little bit. So with the ELISA, if the ELISA comes up that the patient has been exposed to the Lyme bacteria, if the ELISA is positive, the assay, that is when most pediatricians will go ahead and perform the Western blot. The Western blot looks at the actual protein bands that are found on the tick, and there are several of them. You know, your Quest and LabCorp look at 7 IgG bands and 7 IgM bands. IGeneX looks at 14. And there's a reason for that. The reason being that the bands that were taken out from the Quest and LabCorp screening were the bands that were in the past used to make the Limerix vaccine. And you may know that the old Lyme vaccine ended up killing people, disabling them, causing a lot of side effects, and that was immediately pulled off the market. But unfortunately, those bands have not been put back into the testing. That is why IGeneX testing becomes superior as far as blood tests go, is because they look at all 14 bands, the IgM 14 and IgG 14. And many of these bands are very highly specific for the spirochete, and there are some bands that are cross-reactive. So it is very complex reading a Western blot. You need a Lyme literate practitioner. Like I'm a member of the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, the ILADS, and I've been trained with Dr. Jones, Dr. Jemsek, and there is a specific way of looking at the Western blot. Looking at the positive bands. So for example, if you have band 31 and 34, then it means that you acquired Lyme within the last 18 months. If you have band 39, then it means there is a neurological connection. There could be possible autoimmunity involved. What I find that if there is band 41, then you know that there is co-infections and cross-reactivity going on. So it's quite complex reading the Lyme test. So it's always good to have a good ILADS practitioner on board.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to be specializing in this because it's
Correct.
got a lot of specialty to it. It's a lot of differences. I'm wondering too, you said the OSPC could be found on the tick. Does that mean that you have to have the tick, or does it show up in the blood?
It shows up in the blood.
It does. Okay. And then, so this global Lyme Diagnostics is coming up soon. It's not,
Yes.
doesn't sound like it's available quite yet. So what is the best resource then, the IGeneX, or for people to I know that we basically want to work with the gut, heal it up as best we can. We want to get kind of the toxins out and get the immune system to be able to be a little bit stronger before
Right.
some of the tests will show up. So before you even start testing, and then when you do go to test, we've mentioned several. What would be a parent's best option, and how do you find those places?
For lab testing?
Right, for the testing that's
Okay.
available now.
Okay. First thing is what I'd like to just backtrack one tiny bit.
Sure.
Is to explain how to suspect Lyme-induced autism in your child. Right now, here's I remember Dr. Jones explaining this to me many years ago. Now, here's the thing: it's Lyme-induced autism is autism manifesting as a failure to progress versus regressive autism. The difference is timing. While one subset of children achieves certain developmental milestones, but what happens is they lose them. Now, the other subset never passes those milestones at all. They don't lose any skills. They don't regress. Rather, they never develop them in the first place. That is the difference, regressive autism versus failure to progress. So most of the children, and I would say almost all of the children with Lyme-induced autism that I've seen in my practice are just like that. It's autism manifesting as a failure to progress. So that is so if you see this, and then the other things that you and I spoke about, that as a parent, if you have a child that is waiting to emerge, that is really intelligent underneath, and there's something else going on, some infection, some inflammation, something suppressing the brain development, as a parent. Mm-hmm. So what you would do is you would approach a pediatrician, and what the pediatrician will do is is run the ELISA, run the Western blot through Quest or LabCorp. And then if anything shows up, I would suggest even if one band shows up reactive, one band, just keep in mind, I just explained that Quest and LabCorp only have half of the bands available for testing because of the Lyme vaccine, right? So even if one band shows up, I would take my child to a Lyme literate practitioner. And then each Lyme literate practitioner has their own preferences. You know, some of them like to run labs through DNA connections. Some of them like to run IGenics, and of course, cost is a big factor, which is why I'm really excited about the Lyme test from Global Lyme Diagnostics, because that is extremely reasonable. But and it's especially useful for screening. If you have like I was recently at a Lyme retreat. I was leading a Lyme retreat just a couple days ago in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, and I had a mother there. She has 8 children. How is she ever going to be able to afford IGenics testing or even DNA? So she's waiting for the Global Lyme Diagnostics to come out so she can just screen all of her children. You know, what happens is if one child or if the mother tests positive for Lyme, then it's very anxiety provoking, because gestational Lyme awareness is out there now. You know, so this poor mom wants to test all of her children, and it's just not possible. So you asked about the Global Lyme Diagnostics being available. They're available right now. They have the kits ready to go. They are available. In fact, at Autism One, I was going to mention that and see if we could have some sort of a screening for people who are interested. So I'm wondering if I should call and have it set up for next week. I don't know. Well, perhaps you and I can chat a little bit about this later. But
right. Because not a lot of people bring their children to the Autism One conference.
True.
Yeah, I spoke at it last year. It's mostly parents. There are some children there, but not a lot. They do provide some childcare, so for people who are utilizing that, but a lot of people come without their children. So you could contact. Well, we can talk about that later, Ed and Terry, and ask them about that.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's going to be another option that is available now. They just need to get the word out a little bit more, and they're looking at co-infections as well. Now keep in mind, one has to look at symptoms. The most important thing is to keep in mind is Lyme disease and the co-infections are a clinical diagnosis. You need a practitioner that is well versed in, one thing that my patients really appreciate, and the one description that I had a patient's family give me was that, Dr. Dashore, you can see the full 360. Mm-hmm. So you need a practitioner, because I've pretty much lived it, just like you have. So you have that extra sensory perception of being able to look beyond the obvious, and so you need a practitioner. From what I'm seeing, that is why I actually coined the term complex autism. Is you need a practitioner that understands autism, right? That understands Lyme disease and co-infections and tick-borne infections and the clinical symptoms. Understands the labs, what labs to order, how to read the labs, how to treat those co-infections, and be able to differentiate if there is any mold exposure going on, if there is any methylation issues going on, if there is other genetic issues like HLA-DR susceptibilities going on, and come up with a very individualized plan. Because what happens is, and this is again, published research, and Stephen Buhner, the clinical herbalist, talks about this as well, that the bacteria, first of all, the old Lyme bacteria that has been researched many years ago, those have changed, they've morphed. as have the co-infections, right? As the greenhouse effect changes, as our ecosystem changes, as our toxins get more and more toxic, as our food becomes food-like substance, the bacteria have to adapt, and they change. So if you cultivate Borrelia burgdorferi, the Lyme bacteria, in a petri dish, right? And then you just record its various properties. Oh, this is what it looks like. This is the morphology. This is the cell structure, blah, blah, blah. Then when you put that bacteria, obviously you cannot do this, but just, hypothetically, if you put this bacteria in a human, if you infect a human, that bacteria in vivo, meaning inside a live human host, becomes very different from the bacteria that you had in vitro in the petri dish. It's very different. This is something, so, don't ever look for cookie cutter protocols.
Right.
They will not work, especially for our children with autism that are, already suffering from being on the spectrum, that already have brain inflammation, which goes with being on the spectrum. So this is the reason why I learned and trained. I trained abroad in Switzerland and Germany, just to be able to come up with holistic protocols that are very, very genetically tailored to each patient.
And so how does somebody find, I know that I'll link to the ILADS organization as well for specialists in Lyme disease, but how would a parent with a child with autism, is there a great way to find what you're talking about? I mean, the optimum doctor for a child with autism that knows about Lyme and pandas and chronic inflammatory response from mold and autism, all of those pieces. How do they best find that doctor? Do you have is there a link or anything that you can offer, or anything you know of?
For a physician that understands the full 360 that you just spoke of, mm-hmm. I know only one other physician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing, is it's pretty tough. And people are all over the world, from right. Africa to Europe to US. Right. Right. They're kind of like, well, how do I find out? So right. It's great if these tests at least could be sent out, like you said, to save people money too, because affordability is an issue. The global Lyme Diagnostics test can be sent anywhere in the world. That's helpful. Absolutely. For at least that piece. Yeah. Most of this testing. Now, it's interesting because I get invited to speak internationally. I'm going to be speaking. I have already done a webinar in London. I've been invited for the Women's Autism Seminar by the Prince Charles Foundation and Project ASPE. That's happening in the last week of June. So they've invited me to be the lead speaker and a guest of honor. So I'll be going there. And then I've been invited by, of all places, Lithuania. The Medical Association of Lithuania and the Lyme Association of Poland, which is nearby, they want me to come and speak about natural methods because their children are suffering. Children with autism, have become complicated with pandas, with Lyme disease, and antibiotics are simply not working for children on the spectrum. They just get worse. Right, because it's destroying what little good gut bacteria they have left, and we're trying to renew that. So their immune system just gets weaker and weaker. It doesn't help them. Right.
So I've ended up seeing, I'm being invited to speak right at the medical school, which is quite an honor, but I'm really happy to hear, of the growing awareness.
Yes.
For natural medicine. So I'm currently Skyping and with patients from 14 countries.
Oh, okay. So you can Skype with people. That works, and you can send them to do labs near where they live, and then oh, perfect. Okay.
Right. So, that's what we do.
What is your website for people to get a hold of you if they'd like to?
My website right now is my last name. It's www.DashoreIntegrativeRx.com, and I'm going through a process of updating the website, but it's fully functional right now. If you want to send me an email, that's fine. Or you can, all the information is on the website, the phone number, the email.
All your contact information.
Contact information.
Perfect.
Etc. It's all on the website. So yeah, I mean, definitely, it's almost every child that I deal with internationally have a local pediatrician that is willing to learn. So you know, they're very cooperative with labs, and we have various communities here through church, through temple, where when they travel abroad, like I have several patients in India. I have several patients in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, in South Africa, in France, in Morocco. I'm in many countries, South Korea, Singapore. So they are in touch with their local communities as well. And as far as taking supplements, almost I haven't had anybody at my temple refuse to take one box for a sick child as they are traveling to their destination country. So it has been a beautiful community effort as well, trying to get children to heal across the world.
Yes, well, that's good to know that the physicians are open-minded, that are being coming forward to be part of this, that they're open to the natural processes as well, instead of just thinking that pharmaceuticals or antibiotics have to be the answer and that's it.
Right. Yeah. I'm also I'm being invited to do a lot of physician training. So next year in London in spring, we have a physician training workshop for herbal and natural remedies and protocols and approaches and evaluation, the whole 9 yards, for children with autism, for children with complex autism, like I call it. So we are almost already booked out for that, but you know, we'll, in fact, actually we got booked out so early. It's next spring, but you know, London venues have to be booked a year in advance. So we got that, and then we announced it, and then we got booked out. So now we are looking at another venue which can hold about 300 to 400 people, because parents and practitioners both want to come, and since London is you know, central, so we have people coming from all over Eastern and Western Europe to attend the workshop there.
Yeah, so I'd love to. I have something called the Autism Moms Mentor program, AutismMomsMentor.com, that I lead people through the processes to help naturally heal their child's systems, but many of them are in the London area, and in France. Okay. So yeah, if there's a way for them to, is there a link or something that you can give me to find out more about that, or I can just Google what is it called? How would we find out about that?
Yes, not yet. We are changing the venue to a much larger venue. So once we secure the venue, I'll definitely send you a link.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
How they can register and whatnot, you know, I'll give you all that information.
Okay. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Okay, great.
So where were we?
We were, yeah, we probably, moving on to pandas, I suppose now. Yes. So for people who are completely unaware of what pandas or /PANS is, could you also explain that?
Yes. Pandas is what PANS used to be called. It's PANS now, but pandas is pediatric autoimmune, a neuropsychiatric disorder associated with the strep bacteria. And PANS is multifocal, meaning, you know, multiple bacterial infections can cause a pandas-like syndrome. So that is called as pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric syndrome. That's PANS.
And you mentioned with the Lyme that there's Lyme-induced PANS, so they don't necessarily have to have the streptococcal infection.
Correct. Exactly. Yes. So what happens is there are, you know, 3 components of Lyme disease and co-infections that can induce PANS. And yes, research and lab testing has shown this. Now, first of all, you know, the first component is that there, like I said earlier, that there is the presence of the spirochete and co-infections in the brain or in the central nervous system, which includes the spinal cord, which is why you get the paresthesias, the tingling, the numbness, you know, muscle weakness and whatnot. In fact, my son wasn't able to walk
Wow.
And he was in a wheelchair for a couple of years. And if I hadn't, just followed my motherly instinct and researched for thousands of hours, trained, gone abroad, we would have lost him, or he would have been, severely autistic in a wheelchair even now. But he's thriving, thank goodness, right now, by God's grace. And yes, we found 11 infections. So
wow.
yeah.
Living a nice normal life now.
He's living a nice normal life, with the exception of we are trying to normalize his endocrine system, which is affected by the mold. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through PANS really quickly, because we already spoke about the actual trigger for PANS, which is Lyme and co-infections, and then I'll just let you know the kind of mold exposure symptoms and patients that I see in my practice, and how it affects the whole picture. So here we have, like I said, we have three components of Lyme and co-infections. One is the presence of the infection and the co-infections. Then also keep in mind, it's not just the bacteria, right? They live within us. They have to go through their own daily processes. So there is the illness-producing effects of the exo and endotoxins that are produced by the bacteria within the body. Then the third most important one actually is the immune reactions that are produced. Now keep in mind, the poor immune system not only reacts to the bacteria, because it has to, it's bacteria, but they also react to the toxins. So, I mean, that is the design of the human immune system. It's designed to protect the human body from microbial invasion as well as toxin invasion. So your poor immune system is upregulated and dysregulated. So there is a really complex conundrum of immune reactions going on within the brain. That is called as autoimmune encephalopathy. Autoimmune encephalopathy. And it is, why does it become autoimmune? Is because your blood-brain barrier is compromised by the toxins released by the bacteria. So there is microbes or bacteria that can enter the brain, and the immune system can also enter the brain. The immune cells that may not be allowed in the brain, they're now able to enter in the brain. And unfortunately, one of the areas in the brain called as the basal ganglia, the proteins, the amino acid sequences that are in that area in the brain, basal ganglia, those are very, very similar to the proteins that are seen on the spirochetes and on strep bacteria. So the immune system, because it is overactive or underactive, dysregulated, upregulated, who knows what is going on with the poor immune system, and with this perfect storm happening in the body, the immune system goes and attacks these critical areas in the brain, thinking that they are bacteria.
Mm-hmm. Sees it as a foreign agent, an enemy, and
exactly.
Right, end up with these autoimmune issues.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have children, that develop OCD. You have children that develop intrusive thoughts, morbid thoughts. You have children where the amygdala is affected. Bartonella is known to affect the amygdala. Sometimes it's called as amygdalitis because it's so inflamed. Then you have behavioral manifestations. You have emotional dissociative reactions. I have a child who used to hug me all the time, but now he's not interested. He just he doesn't even acknowledge me as mom. This even though he was autistic, I used to get hugs. I used to get affection, but now he's completely withdrawn and dissociated. He's not interested in siblings, whereas previously there was interest. So all in all, these things. And then amygdala again. You can have rages. You can have rages that cannot be stopped. I've seen a little child rage with hiccups, with anger, with behavioral manifestations. And this is a smart little child, and he knows that he's being ridiculous, but it's just difficult to stop. That is where, you know, I knew that I had to test him for Bartonella, and yes, he was actually positive for like 2 different strains of Bartonella, which is also called as cat scratch fever. So if I find out that either the mother or the child had been scratched by a cat or bit by a cat that drew blood, that's another clue that gives me that, you know what, I should probably test for Bartonella. Now, in a normal person, but, you know, a couple of cat scratches, the immune system handles it. But when you have so many other issues going on, that usually ends up as being another chronic infection. Before I move on to mold, one last thing I'd like to say is, as you mentioned, Karen, about the immune suppression and the antibodies that we see in the labs, right? When you have a suppressed immune system, IgM response, which is your immediate response, that may not be seen. And I often see lab positives. Now, the lab itself will tell you that the IgG number for mycoplasma or for Epstein-Barr or for, you know, parvovirus or cytomegalovirus virus or chlamydia pneumonia, the IgG numbers are crazy high. I remember for Brian, my son, that the IgG should be less than 99, 0 to 99 for mycoplasma, and we had 6,000.
Wow.
So it took months and months of herbal treatment, and we had to do 1 week each month of antibiotics, because at that point, one has to weigh benefit versus risk. And you know, because we had a child that was not walking, that has excruciating pain, and mycoplasma has been implicated in making Lyme arthritis worse. Or, you know, and mycoplasma has been implicated in rheumatoid arthritis per se as well. So we had to move fast. So
should parents be having, somebody was just asking me this about mycoplasma and having tests done. I mean, what do you suggest around mycoplasma? Or can you give any information?
Sure. I like to run a full panel, right? I like to run your CBC, a complete blood count, your comprehensive metabolic panel. I like to run, you know, all different kinds of viruses. I like to run the lipid panel to see if there is a false elevation of LDL cholesterol in children, which could be underlying biotoxin illness. I like to look at, obviously, Lyme and co-infections. And then there is a specific panel called as the Shoemaker panel, which one looks at for biotoxin illness or, you know, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So I have them if I suspect that there's anything underlying. But other than the Shoemaker panel, the other labs that I just highlighted, those should be able to run by any local pediatrician.
Okay.
You know, just to look at. So there would be Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, mycoplasma pneumonia, chlamydia pneumonia. I would look at HHV6 strain of the herpes. I mentioned human parvo. If you have a lot of animals and pets, then I would also look at toxoplasma. Most parents with autism usually look for candida, and just keep in mind, if you're looking for candida in labs, always look for the IgM, IgG, and IgA. IgA would give you a clue that it's in the gut, or where else is it. And don't discount IgG, because most medical doctors, by conventional training, you know, have the programming in the brain that IgG is a past infection. But, you know, it's quite startling to me that you're looking at a lab report, and the lab is telling you that you know, this patient is positive. Like, for example, I told you about my son. It should be 0 to 99, and we have 6,000 IgG. Obviously, it's a chronic ongoing infection. So sometimes I'll have parents that will have will actually schedule an hour of my time with an hour of their pediatrician, you know, who is very nice physician, wants to help, but simply cannot wrap her head around what's going on. You know, this is what I learned in medical school. It's an IgG. Yes, but that's not how it works with Lyme disease when you have underlying co-infections. So these labs are good to run, and I'm happy to analyze the labs if anyone, you know. Most patients that are far away, you don't have to fly all the way down to New Jersey. I do have international patients who do have the means and resources, and they're able to obtain visas. They come once a year. So it all depends on your situation. And I can certainly help. You know, I've had hundreds of patients recover. Just like my own son recovered fully, and you know, with all of your efforts, you were able to recover. You were able to get your son back as well, Karen. So
right. Yeah, that's why I want to tell people, don't give up, because there are definitely a lot of great answers out there, and children are recovering. They're getting better, and even any amount of better is better, but there are a lot of children that are really, you know, having life-changing results. So, and from natural resources, that's always what I talk about as well.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Now, when it comes to mold, there is, excuse me. So what happens is, because I've lived it, because I know what can be the symptoms that are not caused by Lyme but are caused by mold. I'm able to ascertain that, you know, this child, when the child is in office, that I need to run a nasal swab to look at any kind of sinus issues with the mold exposure, etc. So then on the other hand, there are some children that have been fully treated for Lyme disease and co-infections, but they still have some residual symptoms. You know, they have headaches, migraines, aches and pains, which will not go away, you know, memory issues. Most of the children on the spectrum that I've seen have been able to be mainstreamed, more or less. So after these children are mainstreamed, you know, other symptoms are not going away. That's when we start to suspect that there might be mold. But for me, this was in the beginning. Now that I've seen hundreds of such children, I'm able to ascertain right in the beginning. So what we do is we do a nasal swab, right? I mean, obviously history taking is first. You know, do you have a basement? Is there any exposure to water damage? Sometimes the water damage might be at the hours and hours of ABA that they're getting, you know, at the ABA center. Sometimes it's in PT. So what happens is 1 out of 4, about 24 to 28% of the general population has a genetic susceptibility, has a DNA makeup, which we can test for, as it's called as the HLA-DR testing, for not being able to detoxify mycotoxins, or toxins from mold, meaning they are highly susceptible to mold. And while we do the HLA-DR testing, we also find out, you know, other genetic susceptibilities, like susceptibilities to chronic Lyme, susceptibilities to multi-toxins, susceptibility to not being able to detox multiple toxins. So this is additional information other than the 23andMe or the Amy Yasko's methylation panel, right? Methylation, the MTHFR, both different kinds of MTHFR. The A1298 and the C677 give you a lot of information as far as detoxification goes. The entire methylation panel gives you lots of information, you know, how the brain and the immune system's working, how the mitochondria is working. Then you have this mold testing that gives you a different side of genetic information. And as I told you, that's what I love. I like to customize protocols because it gives you much faster results.
Well, and people sometimes, the other thing I know is like somebody could do some genetic testing and find out maybe they carry the gene, because 25% of the population has this, but that gene might not yet have been triggered. So just because you have it doesn't mean that you already have all of these problems going on, but it means that you are susceptible. So knowing about this, which I'll let Dr. Dashore explain now, is very important, because it basically is a cascade of inflammation in your body, because your body can't get rid of the toxins that build when you're exposed to mold. You can go into a public bathroom that has molds in it, or a lot of people's homes have hidden areas of mold that they really don't know about. And there are some tests that can be done on your home and other places as well. And I can link to those, but I'll let Dr. Dashore kind of explain a little bit more about this as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you're absolutely right, Karen. Just because you carry the mutation, everybody has genetic mutations, and this applies to methylation as well, not just the HLA-DR. Everybody has genetic mutations. One needs to know, so having a genetic mutation is like having a loaded gun, but one needs to know what's pulling the trigger. It needs, it could be Lyme disease, it could be actual exposure to black mold, or not just black mold. We know that there are 7 to 8 different kinds of molds that can be very harmful to humans, and testing is available. It could be pandas, it could be PANS, it could be heavy metals, it could be heavy viral load. So it is an individual response to what pulls the trigger. It could be environmental toxins of other kinds. Dr. Shoemaker has unveiled, but not fully, I think he's going to unveil this at the next mold conference, is the proteomics, right? And this is a test. This is a very new kind of genetic test that tells you, that looks at your blood sample, and they're able to analyze which genes have actually been turned on and what is the trigger.
Oh, great.
And I believe we can also find out. So once we know the trigger, we know how to quiet the trigger. So this is absolutely amazing. This is, we are going right down to the DNA, RNA level, and we are trying to resequence and help patients to quiet the inflammatory cascades that you spoke about, the inflammatory immune cascades.
And when you talk about quiet the triggers, what types of things are you talking about?
Once we find out what the triggers are, right? As I mentioned before, it could be bacterial, fungal, parasitic, and environmental toxins. Or it could be bacterial toxins. Right.
So knowing how to handle your toxic environment, what you can do in your life, and where you live and what you're exposed to and what you might be exposed to, and how to keep your immune system and your body strong in the first place are all key factors.
Absolutely. And if you are one of the 24% of the population that is genetically susceptible, that is going to be a lifelong alert system that you're going to have to practice. There have been quite a lot of tragedies that could have been prevented. And mold, people think of mold as an allergy. It's not an allergy to mold. Now, remember, I'm only talking about the 24% who are genetically susceptible, right? It's not an allergy. It's not toxic mold. And most importantly, it's not all in your head.
Right. Right. I actually have that susceptibility. I have found. I did the test. Yeah. So and I can tell if I'm around it, I'll start to feeling kind of dizzy and a little spacey, and I get tired. And I'm like, uh-oh. But I just have it very mildly. I mean, there's different levels that people can have it. So I have something that I can take to help counteract it. And I daily take really good care of myself. I eat well. I have a lot of antioxidants that I take and things like that as well.
Yeah. It's good. I'm glad you know how to handle it. Now, for me, it's been, I've had 17 co-infections. I recovered from autism, from Asperger's. I mean, I still have a touch of Aspie. So, and you know, any lack of social graces, that's my excuse. I'm still a
we all need one.
Well, you know, I'm an Aspie, and I'm proud of it. I'm doing fine. I'm okay. You know, I don't have to be completely neurotypical. No,
Right.
You know, so as long as I'm healthy, as long as my immune system's okay, I'm not limping anymore. I'm walking better. My, you know, brain's functioning much better. I mean, when I was hit with Lyme disease after a car accident, it came back so strong that I was in a near coma for 6 months, and I nearly died. I was in a wheelchair. I was barely able to walk, and then I had my son who was afflicted at the same time. So it was a very, very complex situation that I was in, and you know, honestly, nobody does research like a mother of a child that is ill. So it's almost like, you know, get out of my way. You know, I'm going to find a solution, right? You can relate.
Yep. Yeah. It's I've seen some amazing things from parents of children with autism. You know, they're you know, we won't stop, and it's good. Right. We're gonna get our child better. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So it becomes a lifelong, like for me, people think I'm crazy because I can start smelling stuff. You know, I go into the restaurant, a bathroom, you know, it was a hard sell even for my husband. Oh, it must be that time of the month. Oh, well, you know, you're just being overly dramatic. You're just, I'm not. This is, you know, this is real. And of course, he's amazing right now. He's on board. He saw how many people I've helped, you know, and he saw how our son recovered. So he's actually an advocate. He's at his work, you know, people come to him and ask him all about Lyme disease. So he's so yes, it affects entire families. Did you know for pandas, right? Dr. Klinghardt is another one of my teachers, friends, and mentors that I've spent many years learning from him. And he sent us to Germany for, you know, cryosurgery of the tonsils. So what's interesting, so we had to go 4 times, but you know, it was a huge learning process for me as well. And what's interesting is that chiropractors or holistic practitioners in Europe, they don't treat just the child. They expect the entire family to be involved, especially in a case with autism and pandas, because, you know, many parents are silent carriers.
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't know that. Even simple things, well, not so simple, but Candida. Right. If you're treating the child for Candida, but the mother has it, or the rest of the family has it, they share spoons, they kiss, they share an apple, they drink from the same cup, you're passing that back and forth.
That's right.
They don't realize it. So it's very important for families to know to have everybody looked at, not just the child with autism.
Right. And it's also very important to have affordable, because the same applies to parasites. You know, if you're sharing bathrooms, the same applies to Mycoplasma. It's extremely infectious. It's airborne, you know, within the same family. And what also is important to remember is for pandas and pans, it is a B cell. Your immune system has a B cell, which has a memory response. You know, so even if it's not within the child, even if it's in the environment, I've seen children start to get motor tics. That's because that's when, you know, a child's spidey sense starts tingling, and the immune system gets activated, and it is the B cell memory response. The immune system is sensing. The sixth sense comes into play, and the immune system is sensing strep in the environment.
Wow, so, that is amazing. Because you could be in public around somebody who has strep, right. and viruses are very airborne. So, you know, wow. So you could just be out, and all of a sudden you come home, or your child's at school and they come home and they've just been triggered. All of a sudden their behaviors go awry, or they get really sick. Right. And it could just be because, so in that case, would a parent, what would a parent do? What would you suggest to be if you kind of notice that quick onset and you're thinking, okay, something's going on, what can I do?
A quick onset would be, please don't go for rapid strep. It's usually going to be negative. Let me turn that off. So the best thing to do, I mean, unless you know someone has a sore throat, scratchy throat, there are certain herbs and certain German biologicals that will help to downregulate that response. In the herbs, echinacea is really a good one, and isatis. Isatis is a good herb. And then there are antiviral preparations that are available homeopathically in a homotoxicology that I like to use. Now, I don't like, wait, let's go back to the labs. I forgot to mention. So not rapid strep, which may or may not be positive. It's usually false negative in children with immune difficulties. So the lab test to run would be ASO, Apple Sam O, and anti-DNase AB for strep. So anti-DNA SE, so DNase, AB as an antibody, and within parentheses, you have to specify strep. So anti-DNase AB strep and ASO are very reliable markers to know if there is underlying strep. For children that have had tonsillectomies and adenoidectomies for whatever reason, and there are children like that out there, don't be under the impression that you cannot get strep. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense, right? Because I've got parents that are firmly convinced, no, my child doesn't have tonsils. So what do you think happens to the... It's almost like, my child doesn't have tonsils. So when the strep bacteria approach him, they're like, oh, no tonsils, bye-bye, we are leaving. It doesn't work like that. I mean, you still breathe in the strep. The strep still goes in your body. What we find in these children is that very high levels of group B strep in stool testing. So, and as Dr. Trifoletti's research has shown us, it's not exclusively the Gabus or the group A strep. It could be group B strep, any kind of strep, even the so-called good strep, Streptococcus, Thermophilus, that is seen in yogurts, in many probiotic strains, in kids that have PANS responses to strep. They will start upticking if exposed to any strains of strep. The same applies for kids with PANS that have a susceptibility or autoimmunity to Lyme disease, any strain of Lyme disease. So don't be under the impression if you're on the West Coast or if you're in the US, only Borrelia burgdorferi is going to cause PANS, whereas when you go to Europe and you get exposed to Miyamotoi, that's not going to cause any issues. Of course it is. So that's good information. Mm-hmm. Did I answer your question about the strep labs?
Yes, I believe so. Are there, and are most of the general lab, and there's LabCorp and Quest, are the general labs like that, are they okay to use? Because I know, like with the mold issue, sometimes you have to use specific labs that will be able to carry out the specific needs that not everybody has.
Right. Yes.
To test for it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. So ASO and anti-DNase AB strep are fine with any lab, as is the other long list of labs I gave you earlier. The CBC, ESR, CRP, what did I say? Lipid profile, all of the viruses, the Candida that I listed for you, ELISA, Western blot. Either lab is fine to run those through. Now, with the mold, so if I suspect, with history taking, was where we were when we got into the toxins. But so I suspect exposure, or there is known exposure. So while I have the child in the office, I will do a deep nasal swab. Okay, so we've established exposure. Then we are doing a deep nasal swab looking for marcons. Marcons are infections, overgrowth in the sinuses, These are multiple antibiotic resistant coagulase negative staphylococcal bacteria. It's an overgrowth, and this can happen from exposure to a water damaged building, because a water damaged building contains a lot of particulate matter, a lot of bacteria that grow in that damp environment, damp or wet environment. And I believe they call it the dirty 30. So there is, hemolysins and volatile organic compounds. There is fungi and bacteria that grow in that environment. And of course, if we are exposed to it, we can inhale them. Because of the immune compromise, you have staphylococcal bacteria that there's an overgrowth in the sinuses. So the byproducts of this bacterial overgrowth, since the sinuses are so close to your brain, and we've already proved that inflammation can reduce your blood-brain barrier, these compounds cross over into the brain. And that is where they cause trouble. You have your hypothalamus that is suppressed. Many hormones in the hypothalamus, like the melanocyte stimulating hormone that produces a big anti-inflammatory response that helps to quiet inflammation down in many parts, including the gut, that helps to manufacture melatonin in your body. So an important hormone like that is suppressed. There's difficulties with many other hormones as well. So it's safe to say that your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, your HPA axis, is compromised when you're exposed to a water damaged building. So after I run the nasal swab, I will request their respective MDs or pediatricians to run a shoemaker panel. And shoemaker panel can easily be looked up at www.survivingmold.com. The entire list of labs of various inflammatory markers that have to be looked at, and what is the significance of these markers, how do they cause an upregulation of your innate immune system. Keep in mind, right, like I said, mold is not an allergy, it is your innate response. Your innate immune system is your first line of defense. It's your immediate reaction. It does not matter how small the exposure. It is not dose dependent, right? Versus, just to explain better, the acquired immunity, right? So if you're celiac, that's your, an acquired allergy kind of a response, right, to gluten. So if you have an allergy to gluten and you start getting celiac symptoms, it does matter how much gluten you eat. If you eat 5 slices of pizza, your GI discomfort will be very high versus if you ate a bite. Not so with mold and your innate immune response. The innate immune response is immediate, it is not dose dependent, and there is no learning that happens. So each time you're exposed to mold and you belong to that, that moldy genetic pattern in you, your response will be swift and high. So it is the acquired immune system that has that learned response. You know how you say if you're exposed to chickenpox once, you won't get it again? That is your acquired immunity. That's your acquired immune system. Not so with the innate. So immune system is very difficult to understand, but one just needs to keep in mind that mold is not an allergy. It is serious business. It is serious inflammation. That is why it's called as chronic inflammatory response syndrome, because multiple systems in your body are inflamed, especially your lungs, your gut, your brain. I had a patient that was stage 3 sarcoidosis in the lungs, and his entire family tested positive for Lyme disease and mold exposure, as did this patient. And his pulmonologist was like blown away when we were able to reduce his stage 3 sarcoid. They were pretty much waiting for him to die. he would go on to stage 4, which is very common when you're stage 3. It goes into stage 4 and then lung cancer, and there's no cure. Now we were able to reverse it back to stage 1, and he's still improving.
What types of things did you do to help reverse him?
This particular patient wanted to do the Shoemaker protocol as is. So the 12-step Shoemaker, all of the markers, TGF beta 1, your C4A, MMP9, they were all dysregulated. Your ADH, osmolality, the entire Shoemaker panel was dysregulated in this patient. So he wanted to do full, fast, conventional treatment. So for his Marcons, right, for the nasal bacteria, which came up as a large amount, we gave him the BEG spray, which is a double antibiotic plus 1 biofilm busting. So BEG is Bactroban, EDTA, and gentamicin. That is a nasal spray, antibiotic nasal spray that is used to eliminate the sinus infections. Then we used for him cholestyramine, and then later on reduced that to Welchol, which are both bile acid sequestrants. And there is a complex interplay of positive and negative ions, and they pull out biotoxins from the hepatic circulation. So they don't keep recirculating in the body. They're pulled out and excreted in stool. So we did that. And then he had low testosterone. So we had to, what I usually do is being a holistic practitioner, I play the role of the quarterback, the consultant, and most of the doctors are very kind and very helpful and willing to learn, and most doctors ultimately want their patient to get better. I'm sure you get some that only have 2 minutes for you, but most doctors that I've come across with children and with adults with chronic issues have a lot of empathy. They've seen the patient suffering, especially when they see the labs. They're black and white, the numbers are high. That I know what I'm talking about, in other words. So they're happy to let me be the QB. And he recovered pretty quickly. Pretty quickly means like a year.
Mm-hmm. And for the people listening, I will link to survivingmold.com. Okay. Dr. Richie Shoemaker was the original doctor who came up with discovering a lot of the things that Dr. Dashore is talking about and how to treat it properly. And so it's just good to know that you'll want to really look at Dr. Shoemaker's site if you're looking for somebody near you, or contact Dr. Dashore via her contact information, because although you can have the labs done near you, you really have to have a doctor or a practitioner who specializes in this particular protocol to really know how to treat it properly. Most general practitioners, if they have not been trained in this by Dr. Shoemaker, they don't really know how to properly treat it and get the right results.
Yes, that is correct. Yes. Now, I've been training with Dr. Shoemaker for 2.5 years because he's been treating my son. So it's been an intense process that I've been training one-on-one with him for a while, and he's absolutely amazing. It's just such a brilliant man. He's saved, thousands of lives. Mm-hmm. through his research, and he's not stopping. He keeps coming up with more and more innovative ideas. What I'd like to mention with respect to children on the spectrum, again, this whole conventional treatment and antibiotic issue does come into play. So what I'm doing is, I believe there's one other physician, I can't recall the name now, but as you can see, there aren't too many of us, but due to demand from my adult patients who have developed multiple chemical sensitivities, so they cannot tolerate any conventional medication, all the way from them to the children that may or may not have multiple chemical sensitivities, but they're on the spectrum. So one has to be careful with any kind of antibiotic. I have a proprietary nasal spray, which is completely herbal, that I'm currently using on patients, and we have about almost 100 people that are on it now, and and we are waiting for them to be on it for a couple months so we can rerun the labs and look at the efficacy. So it is a fairly moderate size study going on. And there's another study that I'm slowly building is for options to using cholestyramine and Welchol, because that can be very GI disturbing for many people on the spectrum. So I've come up with an herbal alternative that we are trying. And right now we have about 27 patients on it. And as soon as the results start coming out, I'll be presenting them at the next International Mole Conference.
Oh, that's wonderful news. I know that cholestyramine can be, like you mentioned, very GI disturbing and can be very constipating. And many children on the autism spectrum especially already have these issues going on. We can't add to that, but something has to be done. So that's wonderful that you're coming up with some herbal remedies. Really good news. Do you know if somebody is swabbed for the MARCoNS and it comes up positive and they're treated with the bags and it goes away and they're better, they're re-swabbed and it's not there anymore, they found it to be negative afterwards, is that person should be much more susceptible to getting it again, or just watching them for mold indicators, symptoms? Or do you know? I know.
Right. That's okay. MARCoNS, usually cause a lot of chronic sinusitis type problems, so those are relatively easy to spot. If you have a child that goes back to being stuffy, that goes back to having, breathing difficulties, goes back to getting ear infections a lot, so that something is up, something's brewing. So it's so MARCoNS should usually be run once a year. Now, one weird thing happened to us was that, of all places, I didn't even think about this, but my son was recently re-exposed to a water-damaged school bus. I mean, you have this water-damaged building in your head, right? But keep in mind, it could be something like, a school bus or a car even, right? When sometimes you leave your, I've had parents that this happened to, leaving the skylight, not skylight, what is that called?
The skylights, they leak often. Or unless you're talking about something else.
What's
in a car?
The skylight in the, skylight in the car, the sunroof. Oh my God, is the mold kicking in now? Yeah. The sunroof is accidentally left open. The window is accidentally left open, so the car gets water, or there is AC fluid leakage or whatever, right? For whatever reason, the car becomes water damaged, and of course, all they do is they suck the water out from the carpets and they say, "Voila, your car's fine." No, it's not. The best. So let me complete. So so we found mold exposure on the school bus. So my son ended up getting a large amount of MARCoNS all over again, and he also acquired the 6,500 mycoplasma again.
Oh, so you had to start all over again?
So we had to, no, not all over. We just treated for the mycoplasma, and I just used all herbs. And for the nasal spray, I was able to use my herbal spray as well. And the MARCoNS have reduced from a large amount to a small amount. That was last month, so I'm going to rerun it. Keep in mind, using natural methodology, using herbals, is going to take a month or so longer than using antibiotics. But most people I know, are not worried about that because you start improving right away. With mold, it's pretty black and white. You'll see your labs changing. You'll see your you'll see your numbers improving.
Right, and your symptoms. You'll just start feeling better pretty quickly.
Yes. I've had patients with years and years of headaches. That headaches just have disappeared. So we know that these herbal alternatives are working. But, we just need to wait to run the labs again. So we have like concrete data that, hey, it's working.
Right. Wow. Well, I'm sure we could probably talk for days.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Right?
Any one of these, right? It's so now you see why I call it complex autism. My goodness, it just.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm really like you, I'm trying to educate parents and let them know that, you know, the Lyme, the pandas, the mold, all these other things exist. So, you know, a lot of the times I'll talk to parents and they'll say, well, I've had my child on a gluten-free, casein-free diet, or we eat organic. I've had them on for years and they're just not getting better. Well, there's so much more to do. There's just, and so many more things to be aware of that are additionals, like all the things that we just discussed here, and how you can find out accurately the testing that will give you the results that you need, the doctors that you need to go to or talk to, and can be consulted at distance, which is wonderful because people are global. So yeah, I appreciate all of your help today, and I will link to many of the things that we discussed. And again, your website, would you just say it again really quickly?
Yes, of course. It's DashoreIntegrativeRx.com.
Great. And mine is naturallyhealingautism.com, and I will again link to these on the bottom of the page underneath the podcast there. So for people who are wanting to go back, because I know it was a lot of information, a lot of very helpful information. So I really, really appreciate you giving us your time today, Dr. Dashore. And I'm sure that you've helped a lot of people today. And this will, you know, they'll be able to hear this for a long time to come. So now people will have a lot more knowledge to help their children.
Well, namaste, and thank you for the opportunity.
Namaste. You're so welcome. Thank you again. I really, really appreciate it. You have a great day.
You too. Take care, Karen.